How's it going, everyone? Euler Gonzalez here again, looking at the React Performance course, which is taught by Steve Kinney, the head front-end engineer at Temporal, which is a durable execution platform open source tool that behaves similar to Kubernetes but to cover specific business use cases. It's a very interesting tool. So the goal of this course is to look at how can we now write performance React components, and for that we're going to see how do we need to look at the React component structure as a way to write these performance React apps. Also, how can we learn to memorize components as a way to avoid these components to re-rendering, aka to be called. How can we load now content later using the suspend API? What is this React 18 concurring feature called, which comes from the Fiber, and now that allows us to do this high priority rendering and low priority rendering with use deferred and use transitions. And how can we going to build a tool set when we need to identify performance issues and what to do. So the end goal of this, or the TLDR of performance, is it's better to do things, it's better to not doing things right now than doing it. And there's some color that is that you get from that, which is it is better to defer things, or it's better to do things stuff, or it's better to do stuff. It's better to do stuff later than today. So this course is organized in this way, like you had the introduction, the React rendering, reducing context and suspending transition. We're going to make a quick recap of the introduction, React rendering as well. And then what we care about is going into these two topics, especially extracting state logic into a Reducer, passing the data deeply with context, aka how can we now pass data to different components without doing the props drilling or passing data down to all of these components along the way. And then we're going to see how can we scale out with Reducer and context. So we can then now focus our attentions on the next topic, which is escape the hatches, aka how can we use effect as a way to perform this side effect and complete our knowledge, because tomorrow I'm going to now build is a Trello clone, and that will be a very interesting recording. Okay, so because of that, all right, this course is for everyone who wants to go dive deep into the React. Eventually, if you work with React, you will have to do that. After all, you need to know how these things work as a way to perform, as a way to write performance React components, therefore applications. And how you can now build this toolset as a way to identify React performance issues, and when that happens, you come up with some best practice. So this is pretty much like knowing and identify is a big knot, and then pulling the right threads by applying the techniques that you already know over and over and over until you solve that. So because of that, we look at what are the tools that React provide for us, the React Dev tools, the components, and the profiler. The components are more relevant to the development, the profiler to performance, and how we need to understand the React rendering for this mechanism. And to do that, we look at first over the couple 15 days, or over the last 15 days, I look at how can we now describe in the most precise possible way the learn section in React. So when you need to actually talk to other colleagues or PMs, designer, non-technical people, business people, and shareholders, your users. So it is important to know who you're talking to and now how you can tailor the message, frame your message, so you can now take control of that. So you can now provide the value that you're looking for. And I think this is something crucial, especially here as a software engineer. And if you live in a remote environment, you need to put up practice that. Your analytical skills, something is the reason why you're getting paid for, okay? Not only, I will argue that not only here in the software sphere, but also for any other fields, faculties. So, your analytical skills, how is your thinking process? Your technical communications, all right, based on your approach, can I implement your approach based on your description, all right? And also, do you know the best practice as a way to anytime you encounter this kind of problems, you know that this is the typical solution that we apply, these patterns, okay? Hey, here is a common solution for typical problems. That's part of the best practice. And also it's important to spot them, all right? As a way to now provide value. And also is how your soft skills, are you patient? Are you empathetic, right? And lastly but not least is the domain-specific knowledge. In our case, with JavaScript, specifically looking at React. So, because after all, we're gonna make a quick recap of this until we hit this point, okay? So tomorrow will be the big day. So here, remember that after all, React is this framework that allows to write its UI, okay? Is this JavaScript framework? JavaScript is the language, all right? That allows to write this user interface. And how can we describe that user interface? Is by using this JavaScript function. Therefore, this is our React components, okay? We look at how can we do that? How can we import components, export components, connect the JavaScript to the DOM element through the JSX, and anytime we run this function, or React run these functions, it will generate, or the output of these functions is a JSX. It might be ugly at the beginning, but eventually you will get used to that. Not only that, but an also important thing is that once you understand how these things work and what offer you, how do we get here? You will embrace complexity. So I also look at how can we now render components conditionally, okay? And something that we're gonna see that later, especially how can we now, when we are returning is different instance or during our conditional renderings, how they are not considered as a new instance. In fact, they are just a new blueprint of the state. Again, some people are going to talk about that here. We also look how can we render a list of elements and how important it is to put a key as a way to notify React, hey, this is now the order, or this is how you can now look at these elements. And when we have to manipulate each one of them, for example, you have a folder with several files, all right, by picking one of them and remove a file, as long as you know what is in there, all right, so you know what changed. So you know is you have a much more better understanding of what's going on. So that's the reason why we use a key on the rendering at least, and how important it is to define your components in a pure state. Why is that? Because it allows you to run these components in any environment, JavaScript environment, whether it's the client, the server, or workers. It also allows us to memorize that components. Therefore, if those components, or if the component doesn't change, we can catch that, okay? And last but not least is when you're passing down data to all of these components, you can safely stop the execution of that. That's a way to re-render this. So when you're passing data down to these components, this is now us, or in this case the docs, describing how React works and how React see these components, which is you have is the render tree as a way to look at how React actually use a tree data structure, which is a computer science concept, okay, as a way to organize it is UI elements in a way that is easy to traverse, to remove elements, to add elements, and do some other things with them. So the render tree, it also is the backbone of one of the backbones of the React performance. So here you can look at how your components are structured. Therefore, you can know or you can identify any performance bottleneck, as well as how the data flow goes through. And the other thing is a tree depends, which is what are the logic that we're going to pass down to each one of these components, okay, as a way to reuse that logic. And when we need to deploy that to the client, we will want to do that in the most effective and efficient small footprint possible, right? So this is something interesting because now it come out with some other advanced techniques like code splitting, as well as server-side rendering. But before going that, we need to know, now that we know how to describe the UI, is like, okay, how can I now add interactivity to this? And that is how now you can respond to events by setting is a handler. And because most of the time we wanted to show something to the user, some data, we need a way to actually store that, right? So the states are components, it's a components memory where you can put all of this data that you need or that this component needs that will preserve after this component gets rendered. And what is this component mean? What this component mean when you say, what does it mean rendering here? It is that when you now update the state, update the memory, okay, using or setting a state, because after all you have now this particular way of how you can now store data, okay? And if you want to now update that state, you can do that by setting that, which is something that useStates allow you to do. It exposes you the value as well as the setter, okay? So now you might think, okay, so because now I setting is the state and actually is trigger a rendering, okay? Setting a state setting a state, the state values will be available in the next rendering, okay? So you can think that when you're setting a state, the current state, React fix that during the event handler. So even though we don't know what is this rendering, so rendering is the mechanism of how React evaluate the code, call them, and then apply the necessary DOM updates So now the browser can paint that. So it is made of trigger, which is, hey, who caused this? It was the root element, or it was a component, state updates, or any of its ancestors. All right. So once you detect that, you say, all right, now let me call these React components, and now let me now call these React components, whether if that was triggered at the initial render or at the end at the root element, or if this component state was triggered or this state update was triggered at any component. React knows that, and then he evaluates all of its property inside of the inside of this phase. Okay, so it evaluates the entire function. So rendering, what it doesn't mean is that it's going to now time for React to run this React components, this function. Okay, you're going to evaluate all of its properties, event handlers, the entire function. Okay, so if the result of that is now a different state, okay, it will store that memory, it will store that reference, as well as all of the props that had changed, and it also look at the GSX, which is the output of this when you call the React component. And if this contains more React components, well, I'm going to call them, and I will ask the same question. Hey, is the output of this component has more React component? If it is, all right, and I'm going to do that in a recursive way until there is no more React components. So once React, once it is done, the next stage is the commit. So based on the information that he holds from the previous state, that's the way you say, hey, this is now all of the state that changed. Okay, he'll going to apply now the necessary change as long as they're different between renderings. Okay, which means is that as long as they are different between React components outputs. So if it is, okay, let me apply the necessary DOM updates to the DOM, and now the final step, which is something that is taken care of by the browser, it detects those DOM updates and then say, all right, so now let me paint this. And this process is something that happens over and over and over and over every time you set the state, every time you trigger a set state. The trigger, the render, and the commit. So every time it going through this process. Okay, so when you want, for example, update now a series of when you want to do a when you want to queuing a series of state updates, okay, you can do that. This is known as batching. Okay, you can want to do multiple state updates for that, and also there is a uncommon use cases, like what will happen when you want to now during the event handler set the state, trigger a render, and then hold the state at the next line. All right, at the event handlers. And this particularly is something useful if you're going to handle these async operations inside of your inside of your event handlers, which is kind of be counterintuitive, because now you will have to keep track of how those state updates, because now it's triggering some sort of or you're now escaping the boundaries of the JavaScript function. Okay, and this is something interesting because we're going to see how can we do that. All right. So, but before that, we also look at how can we state updates, how can we update our states, how can we update object in state, arrays in state, and the TLDR of that is always return is a new state, period, to be pure in that. And second, if you want to make your update logic consistent, you can use immer, right? As a way to give you this mutability syntax. And then when we look now at how can we scale our applications, okay? Because so far we have only talked about is how can we create is this React components, all right? Therefore, now how can we actually is create is web app? It is important to look at how can we managing our states, because that's the main source of bugs. And here we're going to look at how can we React provide us a guide of how to structure our state, how to keep the state updates logic maintainable using reducers, and also how can we now pass data to distinct components. First thing first, we look at how the inputs reacted to input with states, okay? So if you don't want to actually rendering elements here, you use a state as a way to indicate, hey, I don't want to this component actually render, right? And why is that? Because now we need to look at how can we create our React components, okay? And how now React provides us a way of how to do that, this declarative way instead of this imperative. We're now in the imperative model, which is interacting with the DOM, and then you say, hey, document get element by ID. I want you to now is apply, for example, to hide this element, okay? When a user click here, or for example, when you want to implement is a password field. So anytime the user click here, you detect that, you run an event handler that is going to get the element document.get element ID of the input, and the type you're gonna set that to text as a way to now show the text to the user. And when the user click again, or when the user release a click, all right, you want now to trigger is an event handler that now pulls the input password as password. So all of the things, okay, which is quite trivial to do in an imperative programming, but as you're going to now cover more and more bigger, or as you want to provide more and more bigger user interactivities, okay, it is now interesting and it becomes quite challenging to actually provide that, okay? So why is that? Well, because at the end of the day, this particularly approach, this imperative way of creating all of these components is very hard to maintain, okay? You have now all of these codes that actually you must be very careful of in how you organize your structure. Whereas now with the declarative way that React provides us is say, okay, so pretty much it's like you give it's like when you get on an Uber and then you tell, this is where I want to go. You already scheduled that. This is the destination I want to go. Please take the best path 4. So instead of actually being you the you have the driver and you have the driver and the co-pilot, okay? Instead of you actually be the co-pilot to tell the driver, hey, I want you to turn around, I want you to turn to the left here. Okay, in the next three streets, I want you to now turn left. All right, go on 5 streets forward, and then turn to the left. And then you're going to tell them all of this instruction as you go in. So the whole point of this example is to indicate that you are delegating that to the React, and React give us an exchange. Hey, do this. This is the way of how can we now describe of UI. Pretty much like the UI designer does. So identify the different visual states in your components, then determine what trigger those state updates so you can set the states in memory that represents those states, okay? Avoid any redundant states, and then connect your state or connect your event handlers to set the states. And all of these different steps that it mentioned as a way to know how we can describe the UI, okay, in the React way. Let me recap that. So is identify all of your different visual states. Okay, so pretty much like you have a button, say on hover, on click, on active, okay, and then determine what trigger those state updates. Hey, this is on click, on click, on click, on click, on click, on hover, and represent those states with user state in memory, all right? And then eliminate any non-essential state, which is, again, it's one of the main source of bugs. And lastly, connect the event handlers to set the state. So this repetitive process of now how you're going to develop these React applications is something that is that companies are looking for. It's like any time that a company is telling you, hey, can you do this? Okay, can you actually build these things? Okay, let's say it's a web page. All right. Hey, can you actually build this interactivity? Can you actually know how to do this? That's one of the reasons why I'm going to dedicate time tomorrow to actually build that. And so by following this React UI declarative way of describing your UI, okay, then we look at how can we now organize our state. And this is something important because now it's combining this aspect from the database engineer, like normalization. So what you're doing is to normalize your state, your data, to avoid any redundant contradictions or duplicate the data, in our case, states. So I think this is something interesting, especially when you read the docs, okay, and you're starting to understand now how all of these different fields are combining together here. You got now the UI development, you got now is the database engineer approach of solving a particular problems for the designers to represent the different visual states. From the database is that now how you can manage your data in the most effective and efficient way possible, okay? And when you now look at this state organized, all right, or state structure, React give you some principles. Avoid or group states, group related state in your code. Group related states, avoid any state contradictions, avoid any redundant states. Ask yourself, can I get this data from its props or it is current states, instead of creating a new state, also is how can I now is or avoid redundant or duplicated states. Why is that? Because it becomes harder to actually do that, to keep sync those states. All right. Avoid any nested deeply objects as well, because it becomes also quite hard to update that. So that was quite interesting in choosing the state here, right? Because now then we also look at, especially when you have UI design patterns like selections, use ID and index instead of the objects. If you have now multiple selections, use a set that represents those. So as you can see here, we are now using all of these data structures to help us to cover specific use cases, specific problems. And I think that's quite interesting. I really love this. All right. So anytime we encounter these particular problems, we know what to do. We know what is the best practice to apply this. So when it comes now to look at, so far we look at what is the React way of describing UI elements. You get now is the UI designer approach combined with this computer science, okay? As well as how can we now manage our state in a way that is maintainable. So by following this database engineering concept, normalizations, avoid redundancy and avoid any duplicate data by following these principles, okay? So when it comes now to actually is create now a component that wants to share, you want to share in a state across different components. So here is when we define is a pattern component. So, or AKA as, and this is something that you're gonna do a lot, right? Hey, all of these components actually have the same states, okay? And I want to share this state across different components. So by creating a pattern that allow you to do that, this is known as lifting state, and also known as one single source of truth. Because at the end of the day here, especially when you're doing that kind of thing, you need to know that for each unique state, you will, exactly, so for each unique state, you will choose whose component, or you will choose the components that owns it. This is now the principle of single source of truth. Having this mental model, having the clarity to actually do this is essential. And also to the ability to describe that. Why is that? Because it will now give you a much more better approach when you have to tackle this kind of problem. It's like, hey, it's all of these different states, okay? Do we need to have them? All of these components here. So for example, when you want to show let's say yeah, for example, the tabs, right? Or filtering a list. Okay, this is another example. So you have a tabs, okay, that I want you to again, all of this data that you want is to actually is, so you have, when you have a tab, okay, hey, this tab is showing, you have several tabs, right? And you want to now keep track of which tab is actually changing, okay? Instead of actually having those tabs in instead of having a state on each one of those tabs, well, and after all, you want is to actually share that tab state across different components. So this is when you create is a pattern, lifting state. Again, the whole point of this is to look at how can you create that, and we also look when we use a filtering list as a way to say, hey, these components that live in the these components that live in the search bar, okay, now I want you to now share that states across all of different components, aka I want you to share now this state in not only the search bar but also on listing products. Okay, so that's quite interesting because this is a very one specific case and a very useful case to actually lift up components. Okay, so again, the idea here of actually describing this is to now gain much more clarity when we need to implement this kind of things. And to me, that's quite interesting. Very, 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 very interesting. Very, 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 oh my God, very, very interesting. Yep. Very, very interesting. Totally, totally. So, now with that, okay, that we know how to share the state across components. So the next thing is that what will happen when you want is to now resetting the state or resetting or preserve the state, because sometimes you want us to, for example, now show the same component as I mentioned here. Okay, so state is isolated between components, and React keep track of which state belong to which component. That's the entire reason of React. It's going to keep track of this pretty much like an array of array. Okay, it keep track of which states belongs to which components. Okay, on their place in the UI, and you can control when to preserve state and when to reset it between re-rendering. So hey, I want you to now is preserve the state or reset the state during a re-rendering. Why this is important, why this is useful, okay? So for example, I want you to now, anytime let's say you are building a chat, right? If you are building a chat and you want us to actually switch the between different across different users, okay, across different family members or colleagues, friends, you know, if you want to change across each one of them, you're going to now create. You want us to now create is a new blank state with this data, okay. For this user, for example, you want us to reset the state, or you want us to preserve is the text that you hold in that particularly when you're talking to your mom. It's like, hey, I forget to send this message, so let me put it here in a draft. So again, the particular use case for this, when you want us to preserve or reset the state, okay, is a way of how you can now tell React, because it's going to keep track is, so React React keeps track to which states belongs to each component on their place, but it's based on their place in the render UI. And I think this is quite something interesting, okay? Why is this? Because now it gives you the sense of actually not only what's going on when you are setting a state, which is passing for the rendering mechanism, but also answer another question, is that how then React can keep track of all of this, you know? Oh, it's because it has the ability to know which state belongs to which component, but it's based on the render UI. So because the states are tied, or because because the states are tied, or a state is tied to a position in the render tree. All right. So if you have the same component there, if you have the same component, or you have the same component at the same positions, React will preserve that state. Okay. So same components at the same position preserve the state. It's like, all right, I'm going to preserve this state, so I'm not removing that element there. Okay, I'm just holding is a state from that. However, when you are now, for example, this rendering different components at the same position, React say, oh, by default, I'm going to reset them. Okay, and if you want us to now reset the state of the same component, resetting states at the same position. Okay, so for example, you might want to show is now, you might want this to show now the same component but with different data. So for example, hey, we need to show now this car, or this another car, or this another car, right? Which is also useful in chat applications. Okay, I want you to now reset the state here. Okay, preserving and resetting the state like this. Okay, so you can put the component in a different position on the render tree, or you can use this a key as a way to now tell React, hey, I want you to keep track of this, right? So this is now how you can is resetting the state, because here you are now is anytime you pass here to the chat 2, this is a way of how you can is preserve the state or reset the state. So here by default you say, hey, well, when I select this, okay, I'm gonna set the contact, which is now triggering is this. I'm going to set the state, and therefore I'm going to now render another component, or I'm going to render is the same component but with different data. Therefore I'm going to preserve the state. Okay, so like this, and that makes sense. But for example, what if you want is to now, because after all it's resetting the state, you know, after all is okay, it's not resetting the state exactly. It's because it's actually preserving that. It's preserving that because anytime you set the state in this component and it's rendering it all of these React components, it say, well, because this actually doesn't change, okay, I'm going to preserve the state, you know, this actually doesn't change at all. What changed was the data here. So if you want to now is reset the state, okay, with this new data, well, or you render these elements in a different position, okay, anytime you render this component, which is quite odd here to say this, because now you will say, okay, I'm rendering is this component, but I'm not resetting is the state, because anytime it's rendering in the same position. So how there are several approaches here that you can go with. So for example, you can say is this okay. So I want you to now is based on different I want you to know is based on different based on when this changed. Okay, so if this element change, I want you to do this. Okay, so you can is one way to do that is to create a tracking mechanism here as a way to say, hey, let's want to think about it. One thing that we can do here is to say, well, let's going to create now here something. So because I want to know if these states are different, okay. Yeah, because that's the whole point of this. So when you set this is a new state. This is a new state that I want you to now render with this data, but I want you to is not only set the state, all right, but also I want you to set is the message that this state contains, right? So for example, in the chat, for example, here in the chat. So because now the text is handling down there, okay. So one way to say is that when this change, okay, when this change, look at this, what you can do. There's several ways. We can go with the complicated thing and then we go to the easiest one. So the complicated thing is, okay, let me now here on select, call an event handler. We're now at the text here, okay. So anytime we now, okay, so anytime we now have, anytime we on select, exactly, on select, so anytime on select and on select, so anytime we hit on select here, okay, so anytime we select here, because we're gonna get is the contact that we receive from that. So anytime, look at this, what we can do. So anytime we now on select here, trigger this, we're gonna create an event handler that not only set the message here, okay, but also is to set this component or set the message component. For example, here set the state components there. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we have these components, uncontrolled components, and uncontrolled and controlled component. This is a sign of the uncontrolled component, which means that it's making is not flexible when you want to actually is cover some specific use case. This is known as uncontrolled form, okay, because this is when you define your state. However, when you define is this control forms, is that now you can pass is data to props and they are become much more flexible, these components. So therefore, again, what we can do here is lift the state up, okay, lift the state up, handle that state up, okay, and when that change, when we set the state, we can connect that to our query. So for example, with this thing, so because now we're going to lift state up, okay, applying is the share state between components, okay, you say, all right, let me go lift this state up, okay, or remove the state up here, actually hard-code uh, the values here, okay. We are no longer actually is trigger is this here. In fact, we're gonna now pass, we're gonna receive is an on change handler, right? We want is to hard code now this text by saying, hey, hello, you know, this is something that is gonna be hard coded for every component, okay, followed by the on change. So here in on change, okay, we're gonna now is do this. So because we are receiving is the event from that on change, which is the value here, event.target value, okay. So on change, we are now is setting the state. As a way to make our life much more easy to read for readability, we can say is a handler chat, okay, handler chat or handle chat, right? In this function handle chat, it receives this event, and we go now is to set the text. For that, we can also make it this as a way to have much more so to improve readability here, you say handle handle contact list, or you can say handle selected contact, okay, where I think here we're gonna receive is the contact for that contact, okay, and we're going to now set that state, where in our case is the contact, okay, set the contact for that, good. So we now have the handle selected contact, all right, and now this is the fixed text we are passing here, right? Hello, hello, hello to all of this component. Now what we can do is that, well, instead of actually passing that, I want you to pass is this text as a JSX, right? So on change, we are now not only passing that state here, so as you can see, we're gonna set the state we have is the same behavior as before, all right, but we can do is hey, I want you to now reset this state. So we can now here add in a logic for that. A logic for it. You say, hey, I want you to now reset this component. Okay, I want you to now reset this component. So, all right, how can we do that? Well, one way to trigger that, okay, or one way to say, I want you to set the new text anytime you select that, okay. So you can pretty much do something like this. So when we, oh my God, when we select this contact, we can say, hey, the set text is now to empty, right? So anytime we change here, we actually reset the state. Look at all of the things that I have to do as a way to now achieve this behavior. Okay, we're now making these components much more flexible, which is a great thing. AKA, this is now a control component. Okay, because now we can pass their props. We can pass now the state to the props. Okay. And we have now much more control on the pattern. This actually worked as expected, okay? But what if you want this to now reset the state of this component? So far we achieved the same behavior, right? So far we achieved the same behavior. But look at this. We are now doing things in this highly controlled manner. There's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. But wouldn't it be better to, instead of actually having to lift the state up here, okay? Wouldn't it be better to having a state lift? Oh my God. Yep. So wouldn't it be better here? Wouldn't it be better to instead of lifting up our state here? That's right. We have now the ability to reset the states based on a particular component. Okay, so anytime we now have this, we can reset the state. So, and also, there is also something interesting to take a look at this, because you can say, hey, selected contact 2, okay. Selected contact 2, the handle chat, the handle selected, okay. So wouldn't be an alternative to set this state? Well, another thing that we can do here is to say, again, we set another state here, okay, and when the 2 change, okay, another particular way to do this, going to reset this. Another particular way to do this, instead of listing up the state, is to say, well, let's going to define is a new state that actually know what happened here, okay? That actually know what happened here. Which means is that here on select, we want is to now render this component again, render this component again, render this component again. So by saying is now this function will be handle on select, or handle select contact list. Okay, we're going to receive is the contact here. So the idea here is to say, hey, we want now to define, we're going to define is a new state that actually indicate when this component needs to render. So by defining perhaps is so by defining a state here, so by defining a state that actually keep track of when you know, when combining a state that actually keep track of this, which is that, hey, if this component change for some reason, okay, so we define as on a state, and if this state is the same, okay, for selecting, because after all is this, so for selecting UI patterns, define is an ID and an index, let's say is this is the chat ID, then set chat ID. Okay, so use state for this. So we're gonna have an index ID, and if this index ID yeah, and if this index ID is so chat's index ID. So we got now this chat index ID, and therefore is this check index ID will be, it actually is data that we can get from here. Charity is user stay here. Yeah, can we get this data from this? Now, for example, for this, can we get this data from this? Okay, as a way to have an ID. So, or render different elements here. Okay. Or render different elements here. To set to use contact, or render different elements here at different position. Okay. This is the same position. Many apps, this may be a desired behavior, but not in the chat app. Okay. You don't want to let the user send the message the type run. So we look at how can we do that. Okay, using the lifting state. All right. So far so good. It can work. All right. But here we say, okay, instead of doing that, there is an alternative here, as a way to now reset the state of these components. So how can we do this? It can be by also is rendering is a different rendering is a component in a different position of the render tree. Okay, if that it is, all right, it can be quite complicated to manage. To be honest, okay. Okay, so you can say is now to set the contact, right? And now is the okay. So now that we have this contact, if the contact is the ID, by doing something like this, so to ID, so by defining a logic, okay, make it simple. By defining a logic, no, because I will complicate it. And after all, because I want to force this. I want to force this. That's what happened. I want to force this rendering here. I want to force this rendering here. I want to force this rendering here, and this will be quite challenging to force this by rendering is these different elements. Okay, by rendering these different elements here. Okay, so here, by now using the key at the same position, you're saying, hey, you know what, I want you to now actually is using an index. Okay, I want you to now reset the state of this component. It is way much more easy to do this than actually lifting the state and then you manually have to say, hey, this is not the new state. No. This is when it comes to the say implement different. Okay, so identify the different visual state. Okay, because from then you can define, hey, how is this going to be? How is this going to look like? You know, how is this going to look like? How is this going to look like? What is the initial state from that? What is the initial state from that? How is this going to look like? And because now he's going to preserve the state across chat, but now he's going to reset that. Okay, that's quite interesting. So don't make it simple. Make it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. And then preserving state for remove components. Exactly. One of the way of how you can now preserve state from remove component is to leave the state up. This is one way of how that I did. This is the most common solution. Okay, preserving the state for remove components. You can also use rendering all of these elements in a done node and then do that. Again, there's some performance issue for that. But again, this is preserving the state from remove components. You may also use a different source in addition to React state as a way to preserve that state. Therefore, instead of using a React state, you want to use a different source, the local storage. No matter which strategy you pick, a chat with Alice is conceptually different from a chat with Bob. So it makes sense to give a key to the chat tree based on the current recipient. So all of this is just to help you to provide this mental model of now how React do the thing that it does, especially when you are to reset or preserve the state of your application. Okay, and especially when you want to preserve the state on a remove for remove component, you lift up that state. That's quite interesting. Then reset a detail form for that. So this is an editable contact list. You can edit the select contacts detail and then either press save to update or reset to undo your change. So when you select a different contact, for example, Alice, the state updates, but the form keeps showing the previous contact detail. So fix it. So you get the form reset when the selected contact changed. And in here you got is this. So when this selected contacts changed, okay, you can say, hey, can we keep track? This elements here, this contact manager, is keeping track of those states selected. Okay? Because one way we can do here is to notify here with the key, as long as that contain is because we want us to reset the state of this edit contact. That'll show is the initial data name that we pass through that. Okay, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. So it's going to so React, what it's doing is, by keeping track of this, it's going to reserve that, but with the proper data that we're passing there. So here we can say, hey, let's going to now let the React keep track of this using a key. Okay, so what we can do here is to say, hey, edit contact. We can find a way to keep track of this. Selected ID, selected contact. Selected ID. So assuming that this ID are different, we can use the selected ID for that. Okay? Assuming that this ID are different, when it comes to actually now resetting this state, it's like that. But here, we actually leave the state up, and then we define that select ID. So on that particular contact list, we are receiving that ID, update the ID here, and then we can pass that ID to the key as a way to notify is React, hey, I want you to now store this. Again, reset doesn't work. So we are resetting is the proper state with that. Okay. Not sure what reset is supposed to do. Set the, oh, okay. Oh, okay. So you can say this. Oh, okay. So you reset that and then you save it. But again, this is now how you can tell to this component, hey, I want you to now reset this. Yeah, I want you to reset the state. Do that with this new way, or resetting the state. Reset the state from this component, but you actually must have a key for that, as a way to let React to know, hey, to keep track all of these states that are tied to the UI, as a way to know, as a way to React notify, as a way to React keep track of the state update, as a way to tell React that keep track this component state, okay, for resetting that. Hey, I want you to now reset the state of this component, and the state of this component, and the state of this component, which is you actually call that. Create an image while it is loading. So again, as a way to now, hey, this is as a way to now say, hey, React, this is a new state. This is a new state. This is a new state. So reset the state of this. So reset the state of this. And this is quite interesting because it is also available to this. Fix misplaced states in the list. Fix misplaced state in the list. In this list, each contact has a state that determines whether show email has been pressed for it. Press show email for Alice, and then click the show in reverse order checkbox. You will notice that it is tailored email that is expanded now. But Alice, which has moved to the bottom, appeared collapsed. Wait, what? Yeah, in this list, each contact has state that determines whether show email has been pressed for it. The show email for Alice and press show email for Alice and then take on the show reverse order. Okay. You'll notice that the Taylor emails that is expanded now, but Alice, which now moves down to the border, appeared collapsed. Okay. It's like you are now rendering is that element there. So you're not resetting is that stay there. Appear collapse. Fix it so that the expand state is associated with each contact, regardless of the choosing order. Even though that is showing here, but it's not here, it's on the contact here, because this is how you tell to React, hey, now I want you to reset the state here. Okay. But it say, hey, I'm resetting the state properly. Okay, I am resetting the state properly, and I'm displaying contact maps here, as you mentioned. But I keep the state here. But I keep the state here. But I keep the state out because I keep is the state here. But I keep is the state here. Okay. So initially is all of them like that. So what is the end goal here? You will notice that Taylor emails fix it so that the expand state is associated with each contact. Okay. Fix it so that the expanded state, fix it so that the expanded state fix it so that the expanded state is associated with each context. Okay. Fix it because the associated state is associated with the same contact. Contact name, and then contact email. And it's expanded. Yeah, but it keep is that element here. So because you are now rendering a different element here, and when they say show reverse, okay, it says set reverse, is going to now spread all of this. So this is an iterable, and here is saying, hey, I'm going to iterate through all of these elements and assign this to an array. Okay, so you have display contact. Good. So when someone triggered the set reverse, okay, it actually triggered this re-rendering, evaluate this component, pass through this, and then if reverse is true, it say display contact dot reverse. Okay. But you need to preserve now is the state of that. Oh, okay, so you now need to preserve is the state of that. Because your resetting is the state. So now by doing is this, okay, and you want is to now preserve the state, not reset it. Well, when you show here, when you show reverse, it'll show all of these elements, but it doesn't preserve the state. Inside, it doesn't preserve the state here. And as a way to preserve those states, there must be, you must render those components in the same, you must render those components at the same position. Oh. You must render those components in the same position. Because the states are tied to the position in the render UI3. So now because this is say now display contact, but who is responsible to actually show that logic there? You know, who's responsible to actually show this logic? Set expanded. Okay. So one way to do this is by saying, hey, and we want to preserve that. Except we want you to now show is down there, not at the beginning. Show them with the proper element there. Okay. Show them with the proper element there. So you might now render all of these elements here. You might now render all of these elements here, but it's like you are not preserving is a state there. Expanded height and show email. Okay. So because after all, the states are state is tied to a position on the render tree. In this case, the state is tied to a position in the render tree. And when I click here, it shows that. But when I re-render, or when I show this reverse order, it seems that this component is now showing is this. Is now is now making the expand here set here. So one way to solve this is by lifting the state up. Okay. by lifting the state up. So you lift the state up here, okay? Yeah, one thing here is that to lifting the state up. So once you lift the state up, you have to expand here, and then you can now control which elements actually are going to expand it. As a way to have now is a selected here. Because here what you're telling is that, hey, these elements, I want you to now display them, I want you to now reset the state of this. I want you to now reset the state here. So when you change the order here, when you change the order here, okay, what happened is that because now all of these states are tied, because now with key you are tying is the states to that element, to the components in the render tree. That's quite interesting. It's saying, hey, now I keep track of this state, which is the first position, and that's what I'm going to hold that. But in my case, it say, hey, instead of doing that, I just want this to reset the state. So reset the state here. Reset the state here. So reset the state here. Reset the state and then show them with the proper state. At that position. And then show them with the set exactly. It's reset state, but then show it with that. Yeah, but it's like, I get it. Because here what you're saying is that you are resetting is the state here. Okay? So you want to reset is the state for any of this pattern, any of this at the same position. So at the same position. To each particular contact. To each particular contact. Exactly, you want it to be disassociated to each particular context. And here, okay, because key what is doing is some sort of association with that. You want to be this associated. You want to be this associated to the contact. The state is associated in the tree position. A key lets you specify a name position instead of relying on order. Exactly, but instead of relying on order. Okay, because here I'm relying is on the order, and that's what happens. So for some reason when I do this, you are relying in the order, but I don't want you to rely on the order. In fact, I want you to now rely on the contact here. But again, because this is an object, okay, so when you show this, it's not working as expected. Because again, it's associating it with this huge, gigantic object. And for that, you will prefer to use an ID for this. Key contact ID. But that'll be is here. Do we have contact here? Yeah, contact ID. on the contact ID. It's because, okay, it's because the key, what it's doing is to keep track. Okay, if I do, for example, here, like so, it's say encounter two children with the same key. Key should be unique so the components maintain the identity for that. So you are going to bind, so you are telling to React, hey, I want you to bind this, what in the F? I want you to bind that, of course, now it crashed. So I want you to bind is this, not in the order, but with the data associated to this. But to the data associated with this. And again, this is something interesting because with key, you can now is not only reset the state of a component, but also is resetting a state not by its order, but by this data. So I want you to keep track of this state per data, not by the order in the index. Holy moly. So it's because a state is associated to a position in the tree, because the state is because the state is associated with the tree, because the state is associated with the position of a tree, okay? So if they are the same, exactly, because if they are on the same element, or if they have on the same position, okay? Now when you pass a key, you say, hey, let me now bind this to the order that I'm going, this data that I'm going to use, I'm going to bind this to the order. But perhaps this is what you want, okay? Perhaps this is what you want, okay? No, that's not actually what we want. That's definitely not what we want, not at all. It's actually quite counterintuitive. It's actually quite counterintuitive because you say, hey, I'm associating this with the ID, bro. I'm associating this with the order here. So if I show this, because I associate this with the order, well, if I reverse that, and if this is the first element here, in this here, and then I change this, is like I'm resetting is stable in this order. I'm resetting is a state in this order. Not per, okay, not per the data. Yeah, not per the data. So now I'm associating is this, not per order. No, now I'm associating is a state, not per order, but for the contact ID. So hey, is this actually okay? If this actually changes the position of the array, now I want to reset that, or yeah, now I'm going to reset that. Oh my god, that's quite fucked up. Fix misplay state in the list. And this kind of challenge is something that you're gonna find a lot. This is quite interesting because this is what you're gonna find a lot, especially if you want to reset the state here. Holy moly. Extracting state logic into a reducer. This is something that I'm quite familiar with, okay? And we are using this as a way to say, hey, let's go to abstract, especially as your states, as you're handling more interactions in your component, it makes much more sense to create one single simplified path to do this, or one consist way to do this. Okay. Yeah, with state reducer. Dispatch actions from event handlers, like so. So instead of actually doing this, you're going to dispatch this action. Okay. And then dispatch action here, which is now calling is the message reducer. Okay. Is now actually changing that. Change selection. Change selection here. Exactly, it's actually not triggering that, so it's not emitting that dispatch event for that. And the contact list is like not emitting those events, or it's not emitting those, or it's not dispatching those actions or setting the state. And here, because now you want is to have is this message reducer here as a way to say, hey, let's now take a look at this. Okay. And here we are calling is our dispatch, which is our setter using the useReducer. We're gonna pass it an object with the type here of change selection, which is here on click on the contact link. You say change selection, and that it aspect is it aspect is the state, this new state. Okay. The type and the type and the action here. So in that is this is a change selection. So yeah. Do you expect anything else? I think you do. I think you do. Which is in this case, yeah, dispatch the type and followed by some data here, which is the contact. Yeah, because you're not, and you're going to pass is the data that it received, that it needs to pass down. Type and the task. But in this case, we want is to pass now is to this is a select ID. But it's the action contact ID. Okay, the ID as the contact ID. and corresponding to the action object that it received, which is the select ID, and the proper message that it got. But I don't have that data here in the content, do we? No, because we are on the contact list, only got this, not the message. So here right now is saying, hey, I want you to now reset the state of this chat, but per the contact data. So you want to bind that reset state to this data. And all you're doing is that. Okay. And here, this is when you're going to say, hey, on the chat is when I'm going to dispatch, which is something that I'm receiving, exactly dispatch now this type of action, which is now setting is the state, so I can go back to where this actually came from. Okay, for example, in our app here, as I would to say, hey, this dispatch comes from this dispatch that is useReducer. That now here we have our state update logic, message reducer, where we have here change selections, edit message, and again, this must be very descriptive. So message here on the chat is when we say, okay, this is now the type of edit message, edited message here. Okay, edited message here. Okay, edited message here. Followed by the message that it'll be is whatever we get from the target value, which is the current input or text area. And now we're actually is triggering these state updates using the useReducer as a way to make our logic or state update logic consistent. The trade-off is it now requires more code, but you get now a more testable way to, you get now a way of how you can, you're now more testable and debuggable code, because I'm all for it. Again, for simple state updates, that might be quite overkill. Okay, that might be quite overkill. And then clear input on sending message. So here's when we actually is to change selection is this clear input. So we can reuse that. Currently present send does not anything. And an event handler to the send button that will show an alert with recipe email and message, clear the message input. So when we click here, where this now actually must come from the chat, here, on change, despite the edit message, all right? And we want is to now which is here, okay? So when this change, we want now is to handle this event. We want now to connect the state that to connect the state to set it, to connect the event handler to set the state. Using our case is E. We don't actually need an event here so far, because what we're gonna do is to not only show is the alert, okay, about is the we're not gonna only show the alert. It's something that I'm gonna leave that the alert with the what? With the email recipient and message. With the email recipient and message. Okay. Where in our case is the message here that we receive here. Okay. So only all these properties are read-only in props. Okay, the props are only read-only. Okay. And then you go to this patch, because something that we receive here, we're using is now useReducer to say, hey, the type here, it'll be is the edit message. Okay. It'll be the edit message, like so. And clear the message input for that. So this is supposed to work. It will going to dispatch now this event. It's going to dispatch now this setter function from the useReducer or from Redux, okay, as a way to understand, hey, where this actually is being dispatched and who is dispatching that. So when we take a look now here, and in our component chat, is saying, hey, dispatching for this, which is the useReducer, which is now a message reducer that contains all of the state update logic. Therefore, is when you're going to look at which actually see fit here. And for example, we say, hey, hello, send to Taylor. The hell is this? Alert contact here. Because it's on click. And there you got it. And then clear that input. Restoring valid inputs when switching between tabs. Restore input value when switching between tabs. I can restore input values when switching between tabs. If your app remember a draft for each content separately, restoring them when you switch component. Your task is to change the way the state is structured so that you remember a separate message draft per content. So because here we are using the key as a way to now reset the state, okay? I don't want you to now reset this. I don't want you to now preserve that, okay? But you want us to remember, but it will be better if you remember a draft for each contact separately. Exactly. If they have the ability to now remember that from each contact, okay, remember that per contact separately. So this is something that we need to do, okay? So, because now we're going to modify some step or state update logic, here wants to remember per context these chat apps, okay, mm-hmm. Anytime we dispatch a message here, when we select this, okay, anytime when we select this, we will need to say somehow to actually is send the message here as well. You know, we need somehow to actually send the message here. Or when we dispatch this change selection, we not we don't modify is the message, you know. So we can say hello, 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 howdy. But exactly, we need to do that is per change selection we contain is the same, but we need to do that is per message. The question is that when we change selection in our chat, or when we edit message here, we need to somehow is to pass that data. So I don't want you to clear that up. In fact, I want you to now, anytime you call the change selections, somehow you store that. Somehow you store that. Hey, this is change selection. Okay, that it contains the ID, but I don't want you to remove the message here. In fact, I just want this to preserve the message state. All right. Which now this chat with key is saying, hey, I want you to preserve this, all of the state here per component. So here we're not going to mutate the message here. So on the message, when we are editing that, we are editing the message here. Okay, when we are editing the message here, we want to take the message from that. And when we change that, we would like to take that action if that exists with the message here. Because it's resetting that state. Oh, unless we have that state there. Unless we get the data there. Except it's removing from all of this. exactly, is that preserving that state from that. So we will need to somehow is to send the state data through that. That might be one way. That might be one way. That completely might be one way. You know, how can we now send the data here? Okay, on change selection as a way to preserve that state. As a way to preserve that state, or in the edit message, as a way to preserve that state. Because change selection is now clearing the input. This is because you don't want, but your task is to change the way the state is structured, so you remember a separate message per contact. You will need to make a few changes to the reducer, the initial state and the component here. So pretty much like here, it's like you're saying, hey, now this message here, you will want to hold them is by you want to now is to hold them by something like this. Okay, so you have now an object whose ID match with that. You know what I mean? So in our state, okay, in our state with the action contact ID, which is the selected ID, hey, now I want you to, when you change that, pass through this. Okay, so state dot message the action dot contact ID. All right, which is deselected, and then what you two get me is that. Right. So some way you will have is now to define is all of these different states for this data, which to me is like hello Alice, and again we are hard coding this. Hello Taylor, Alice and Bob, Alice and Bob, right? So here when we change that, okay, we want now to reference is the state.message here that will contain is the action.content ID, which is, we're assuming that is 0, this index. So what we're doing is indexing this. Is indexing this. We are now is indexing this. So now here, this is the message. That's right. So I want now to show is the value at that position. Interesting here because you say now I'm showing is a object here. But that actually is not what I meant to. You know, it's message, and the action that I'm going to receive here, followed by the contact ID. But it say, hey, I'm returning is this object, which contains object. Okay. Okay. 0, 1, 2. And for some reason, this is more like for JavaScript aspect. But it's now showing this. Yeah, but I know, but this actually is not working. Question, are we passing that data here in this change selection? Yeah, we did. Yeah, we are. And I want you to now show that. Okay. State.message. Okay. So here, what I'm saying is that, hey, this message here, or well, message in plural, these messages, okay, state.messages, I want you to now show is what we got is here. You know what I mean? Yeah, but okay. State.selected ID is equal to the action message. Because it must be like this. It must be like this. But in this case is the the contact ID, exactly, the message contact ID is now what you get in the state.message contact ID. Okay, so what you want is to bind this. What you want to bind? Well, messages here. Okay, messages at that position, which is the action, the content ID. Okay, so at that position you will have is this. Question is, on this state we got the selector ID. I don't follow. I don't follow here. State of selected ID. But this is under the because you're mutating is a state. Okay, because you're mutating is a state here. Okay. And then because you're now nested up here, let's say, okay, this is state dot message in plural. What you're gonna say is yeah, that's right. Okay, state. Secondly, there's no need to do this. In fact, it's this. You say, hey, whatever you got on the state dot message, okay, I also want is to now add, okay, so for example, if this start with 0, I also want is to add now is an ID, which is selected ID, exactly, made more sense, followed by the state dot message with the selected ID. That's a way to now have access to that. And then you have is Taylor. But hey, it's actually not showing Taylor. Taylor, and when you change selection, it say what the, oh, because because it must come from state.selected ID. Exactly, state.selected ID is equal to the action message. But it says on change selection or an edit message. Oh, okay. So on edit message here, we are now appending that to this by saying, now here is where we got this data, and here we say, hey, the state.message, whatever you got in, also add that edit message to that. So identify that state selected ID and see if you match this as a way to add this. That's quite interesting. Yeah, because you also need to update is the message here. As a way to say, hey, let's going to pick me is this one. Data from this. And now I'm actually getting is the data from this element here. Any of the event handler to implement this behavior. Without a reducer, you will have to change every event handler that update the state. That's quite interesting. So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye-bye.